Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Cropper here with Onar from Norway, again, the erstwhile Nazi racist, and Mr. Cropper, his Nazi come along. That's some insane stuff. So I think we should start talking with that. Rucka has accused you of being. Lots of people are accusing you and I both of edging right up to racism or even being wild racists.
I think that this is not Rucka reacts, but Rucka overreacts. Uh, because I mean, like I went back and listened to it. Like, were we asleep at the wheel in the bus there for a while? Did we like zone off into Nazism land or something like that? I just couldn't hear it. I was like, he picked up one sentence out of context where I said something like, um, people tend to think in groups, it's unavoidable or something like that. And he took that to mean that I'm endorsing collectivism, even though that was literally just like a little tiny bracket where I was slamming the left for overgeneralizing and thinking in groups.
Well,
So like,
now I think that point is fair enough. People do think in groups, and objectivists are an exception to the rule because of our philosophy.
yes, and but the point is that's an acquired taste. It's like as I made the point later, it's like we have like tens of thousands of years of natural selection where religious people and who were thinking in groups survived by killing other tribes, like tribal warfare, and therefore tribalism has a tendency to be with us, and it's difficult to get rid of that, and you really have to work against it, like work against your natural inclination towards thinking in groups in order to be an individualist. So it's hard work. This is a point that Ayn Rand makes all the time. Thinking is not automatic. You have to think, and you have to choose to think.
And as long as people are thinking in groups and being tribalist here, we might point out that while we are trying to bring some interesting thoughts and information forward, they're rejecting it just because they're part of a group that says we can't think about these things, we can't discuss them because we would become evil Nazis. So they're not thinking about what we're saying or what you're saying, they're just dismissing it with their group thought,
Yes,
unfortunately.
precisely. And so I think that when we jumped into that discussion before, I tried to make it's like the caveats and ifs and buts and thens and like all of these things, but it was obviously not enough because those who want to hear like read in whatever they want out of the tea leaves, they will find whatever they want. It's like a reading the horoscope or something like that. That you can find anything you want, and I feel that that was what Rucka did. He was mentally projecting things into our conversation, things that we not only didn't say but said the opposite of. And this kind of mental projection and mind reading, I actually mentioned it in the video that is something that people who are open-minded have a tendency to do. It's a weak, let's call it a weakness of being open-minded, that you tend to overgeneralize, over read more into things than really are there. So, like, I'm not going to analyze Rucka, but he is a creative guy, and by virtue of being creative, it means that he's tending towards open-mindedness, which also means that he might be also susceptible to overgeneralization or overreacting. So Rucka overreacts in this case might be a case of being susceptible to open-minded thinking, and there are upsides to thinking in being open-minded, but there are also downsides. But I think that he made a point that this was not part of objectivism. I think that this needs to be answered very, very strictly, because he says that tabula rasa, or the blank slate, that this is the view of Ayn Rand, that we're blank slates,
Yeah.
and this is not compatible with biological determinism, is what he said. So he has this misunderstanding that he thinks that the blank slate equals free will. That's completely wrong. First of all, Ayn Rand very specifically, there's Stephen Hicks had a brilliant video about this. The philosopher scholar Stephen Hicks, where he explains Ayn Rand's concept of tabula rasa, or blank slate, and he's very specific about that. Ayn Rand was a philosophical empiricist, and that she was meant tabula rasa in a very narrow sense, very narrow sense. And the narrow sense is that we're not born with innate memories or ideas. So all our concepts come from perception, every single one of them. So in other words, we're not born with having a memory from our past lives or from genes or something like that. We don't have memories, we don't have ideas. And in fact, we're not even born with logic. Even logic is abstracted from perception. So if you put I don't recommend doing this at home, but if you put a baby in a black room with deprive it of sensory input, that baby is not going to develop logic, because logic comes from the sense. Even logic, like Kant thought it was a category, it's not. It's actually derived from the senses, and we derive it from the law of identity, that there's no contradiction in reality, and we just abstract that and form it into logic. So even something as basic as logic is not something we're born with. This is what Ayn Rand's point was. We have no innate ideas, not even logic. And I completely agree with that. And that's the blank slate, as she defined it. No innate memories, no innate ideas, including logic. She did not, however, say that we don't have any innate personality, or she doesn't say that there are genetic factors that doesn't influence behavior. Behavior is not the same as an idea or a memory. So you can have innate genetics that influence behavior, but that's not the same as having innate memories or innate ideas.
Yeah, the thought occurs to me, what would these people think of a caveman 100,000 years ago who had no philosophy and no ideas? Like, what? Like, he didn't have a specific, explicit set of ideas, but he was making his way around in the world. Like, what was motivating him? So, to the extent that we formalize philosophy and ideas and bring them into focus and understand them, we're going to be able to understand what we're doing better as human beings. But that doesn't mean that if we don't have ideas, we can't act. You know, if we haven't explicitly outlined what these ideas are and we don't have a philosophy and it set down in a book, therefore we can't even get out of bed in the morning, that's insane. Of course, people are going to get out of the bed, they're going to go through their lives and act a certain way, even if they haven't explicitly identified the ideas. So what is it that was driving a caveman 100,000 years ago, or that drives anybody today who doesn't know anything about philosophy?
Precisely. So those ideas are incredibly interesting to talk about, and any discussion about like really expanding the topic of philosophy should involve a conversation about what went on 100,000 years ago. No question about that. But let me just finish about the blank slate. Blank slate does not equal free will. The Marxists don't believe in free will, but they do believe in the blank slates. They believe that some dictator, emperor god can sit there and write their good ideas onto that blank slate, socially construct people, mold them into their fine little ideas. So you can believe in the blank slate, but you don't have to believe in free will. They can say that, yes, you're not born with any innate ideas or innate memories, but once you're born, you're predetermined by your environment and your genes, what concepts you form. So the blank slate does not equal free will.
Yeah, and the Marxists think that they can use the blank slate to make the new man. right? The new
Yes,
socialist
the
man.
Soviet man.
So we've got to be careful with the idea of the blank slate. It doesn't take place outside of the fact of human nature and what a human being is. It takes place
No.
inside the context of a human being. It's not a
And
platonic emptiness.
precisely, and and similarly, the blank slate does that. Blank slate doesn't mean biological determinism. Similarly, uh, innate ideas does not mean biological determinism. So you can
Innate.
believe.
Now, you say innate ideas. You mean innate behavior?
No, I'm saying even if someone believes you're born with memories and born with concepts, like born with the concepts of logic, something like Kantian.
Even that wouldn't give us determinism. Even that would be short of determinism.
You can say, all right, if you're born with these ideas, you can still have free will and change your ideas. So even if you reject blank slate, that doesn't mean that you reject free will. So I'm just trying to point out that these two concepts have nothing to do with each other. You can believe in blank slate and free will, blank slate and determinism, or you can believe in no blank slate and free will, and you can believe in neither no blank slate and no free will.
Right.
So you can believe in anything. And Ayn Rand believed in blank slate, and she meant conceptual blank slate, epistemological blank slate, but not metaphysical blank slate, conceptual blank slate, and free will. That's what she believed in. And if you believe in that, you're consistent with objectivism, as Stephen Hicks outlines in his brilliant video.
Now, there are lots of things that we do without thinking about them. So obviously, not everything is a purposeful thought with a human being. I mean, right down to the movement of our stomach and the beating of our hearts, that is not voluntary. But then breathing is voluntary. Breathing is somewhere in between. And there are going to be automatic things that you can pay attention to them, you can have some effect on them, but they're going to be automatic. You're going to get sleepy when you're tired, you're going to get bored when your mind isn't being stimulated, etc. All these things are the background, and then your conceptual mind and your free will take place in this context. But your conceptual mind and your free will are not some floating abstract nonsense that has nothing to do with reality. It's inside of a human body that's evolved for hundreds of thousands of years.
Precisely. And notice that determinism, and it doesn't matter which kind of determinism you're talking about, whether it's environmental or physical or biological determinism. Determinism means that you don't have free will. Determinism also means that time doesn't exist. So in physics, you have physicists who claim that time is an illusion, that you're just simply playing a predetermined record. And that time is just an epiphenomenon. It doesn't really do anything. So there's nothing that time really does other than just unravel what is already predetermined. So now that's a crazy idea for obvious reasons, and for the same reason, rejection of free will is a crazy idea. But the point is that just because, let's suppose you reject determinism, does that mean that you have to believe that nothing is predictable, everything is random? In other words, is the only alternative to determinism indeterminism?
Well, that would be Platonic rationalism, to just say, I don't believe that I'm predetermined, therefore everything must be up to my free will. But
Precisely.
It's not clear that everything's up to your free will, because you got your heartbeat and your stomach, and you get tired and you get scared in the dark, and some of these things are not up to your free will.
Yes. So, in fact, the alternative, the correct, we can say that determinism is misintegration, and the indeterminism is disintegration. Yeah. So what is then integration? That is naturalism.
To take account of our nature and our mind.
Yes. Nature means that everything, it comes from Aristotle. There's no infinities, no singularities in reality. Everything is limited. Everything is finite, including free will, right? Everything is limited. So everything has a nature, Having a nature means that it's predictable to some degree. And this includes free will. Free will is to some degree predictable. It has limitations. It has an envelope, a shape of things that are holding it back, creating a probability distribution that you can make predictions based on. You can predict that people are going to follow the path of least resistance. The correct way in terms of nature to think of free will is as a limited resource, like energy. It takes mental energy to make a choice. And if you're tired, it's harder to make that choice. So everyone has had this sensation being in class, and you're just so tired, and it's boring, and you're trying to stay awake. Now I'm choosing. I want to stay awake, and you're just using every inch of energy, mental energy, just to stay awake. But you feel yourself nodding off, like, and you wake up like that, and you're trying to use your free will. You really are to stay awake, but you just can't because you're running out of steam, out of energy. So my point is that this is something that you're doing at every second throughout your life. You have a budget, an energy budget, a free will budget, but free will does not come for free. It comes at an expense. So when you focus your mind, you're using muscles, your mental muscle, and any muscle takes energy, and that's true for your. There's not mind-body dichotomy here. It's not like your free will is some supernatural ghost that doesn't have to rest, that has infinite amount of power and infinite amount of energy. There's nothing that's infinite in the universe, including free will. So everything is limited, free will included. And once you start to think of free will as your bank account, that keeps on being like you have a limited budget that it's refilled every day you go to sleep. You refill your free will bank account. You have that's your budget that you have to spend during a day. And if you, so for instance, if you're focusing on bicycling, you're going to learn how to bicycle. Then you have to spend so much mental energy on bicycling that you don't have any surplus to focus on other things. You can't read a book while you're learning to bicycle. So you're using up your budget, and using it for one thing means that you can't use it for another thing. And sometimes it's just easier to relax. And once you relax, you fall into patterns that are predictable.
Isn't it interesting that we do have things that we do to so-called unwind so that we can refuel and get ready for focused activity? And you'll find these things that we do to unwind are like regular things that we do almost daily. Like, for example, a bike ride. If you do it constantly, you go on the same route, it's the same time every day and stuff, then you can use that time to refuel. You're not, whereas reading a book, you're focusing and using up your energy. So there are certain things that we refuel while we're doing, and you'll notice that those things don't take a lot of focus. And they prove the point that we do have to have things in our life we do sort of automatically.
And because of that, we are to some degree predictable. If we had an infinite free will budget, we would be infinitely unpredictable in our behavior. But because we're limited, and you can make predictions that most people are going to follow the path of least resistance most of the time. Yeah. That's what that means, basically. So because of that, you just need to, what is the least path of resistance? That's dependent on your nature, your biology, right? So therefore you can make certain predictions about people statistically. It doesn't mean that you can say that he will always do this, but you know that since it takes energy to overcome a path of resistance, then most people are just going to avoid that. Or they're not going to do it all the time because it's too exhausting.
Well, yeah, there's the phenomenon of people, like I say, you've got free will and you can focus, but there's the phenomenon of daydreaming. There's the phenomenon of zoning out while you're on your way to work, and all of a sudden you wake up and you go, I've been driving along and not even know what I'm thinking here and not know what I'm doing. I was daydreaming, driving. And there's the phenomenon of losing focus while you're reading, and you all of a sudden realize you've gone through this whole paragraph and you don't know what was said in the paragraph because you're
Yeah.
talking to yourself about carrots at the store. You need to get some lettuce and milk and stuff. And so we cannot focus infinitely. And when we're not focused, something takes over. You know, the stuff, the thoughts we've had before, our beliefs that we've set up, our framework, our viewpoints, something is there driving and influencing and doing the stuff when we're not 100% laser focused and using free will. So this should be obvious to people that there is something going on with the human mind besides all of us just sitting there bright-eyed and full will all the time. Clearly people aren't using their willpower all the time. They're going on some sort of automatic stuff, or else the left wouldn't be so big. Those people aren't thinking for themselves. They're just shutting down and following. So anyways, I interrupted you in the middle of your speaking. I just had to get that in. Go ahead.
No, it's brilliant. So one example, I'm just going to give an obvious example. If people have Parkinson's disease and you say, okay, you lift your hand and you're shaking your hand, that's involuntary. Now you tell them, use your free will to make your hand stop shaking. They can't do it like that. And so there's something biological that's influencing or limiting their ability to exert free will. In this case, it was something very very neurological in your nerves. But there are other things. Consider, for instance, women have their period once a month. And everyone who has encountered women during their period know that they can be a little bit irritable. Now, if you take a statistical study and say, we're going to compare the behavior of women during the period to compare to when they're not on the period, are you statistically going to find a difference in behavior between those two states?
Sure.
Obviously.
And that doesn't destroy free will.
No. It just means that during that time, there was a factor that made it more difficult to make certain choices. And this is going to skew the probabilities during that period.
Yeah, some of the women don't have the energy to overcome their tendency to be short-tempered or whatever, while
Yes.
some of the women do. They answer the questionnaire politely or whatever, even though they're on their period. So we would see some little skew, which leaves it open to free will to still exist. All we're saying is that there's something influencing the entity. That's all. That's the only claim that's being made, is something is influencing the entity. Free will is still there and can even skew what that is, but there's some influence on the entity, namely her period.
That's right. And more important, Ayn Rand did not believe that free will was some infinite capacity, or that was outside of the physical realm, something supernatural that could not be influenced by the bodily processes or the brain or something like that. And if you believe that free will is somehow infinitely capable, infinitely powerful, infinitely resourceful, then you will have a misintegration. Then you're not in coherence with objectivism. Objectivism cannot be built on such an idea of free will. Free will is a limited entity or a limited process in nature, just like everything else that exists. This goes back all the way to Aristotle, who first formulated that there are no infinities or singularities in nature. Everything is finite.
Now maybe we better point out the meat of the problem. What's the meat of the problem here? And I think the meat of the problem that people are worried about is that we're going to say that people from sub-Saharan Africa have a lower IQ and therefore we should separate them into separate societies because their behavior is skewed.
I made the argument in the video that Rucka overreacted to, that during the Civil War, there were white supremacists on both sides. So there were white supremacists dying to free the slaves, fighting against white supremacists who wanted to keep the slaves. So, in other words, even if it was true that you can judge all blacks based on the color of their skin, like they believed. That's what they believe. I'm not saying this, but when they believe this, it's not given that you're going to have a predetermined outcome. In fact, it's kind of crazy that you're like, on the one hand, you're saying we have free will, but if people believe that there are IQ differences, then we're predetermined
That
to
yeah,
slavery.
that's a good point. Do people have free will to think about and understand reality, or is it just the case that once we understand that IQ has something to do with genetics, we're all going to go insane and start killing people in gas chambers?
So that's right, and so here's something interesting. It was in fact that the studies, the science of intelligence of IQ, that destroyed racism as like scientific racism, because all of a sudden we understood that there was just a huge diversity, a bell curve of distribution, and they found out that like 1/3 of American blacks are smarter than half of whites, American whites.
Yeah.
So like, okay, uh, you can't put everyone in a box.
Yeah, even if we say that on average, any given individual in a population is lower or higher IQ, that tells you nothing about the individuals.
Absolutely
And
not.
like you say, 50% of whites are dumber than 30% of blacks just because the bell curves overlap in this way. So
Yes.
so we can't if you go around saying we're going to kill everybody with a low IQ, you're going to kill off 2/3 of the black people and half of the white people and about 20 or 30% of the Orientals, you know, so
Yes.
or whatever it is, you know. So low IQ isn't the question here.
No,
And
it's
we're
not.
not going to do anything about low IQ because it's about individuals anyway, at the end of the day.
That's right. That's one thing. And the other thing is, like as I said, the science of intelligence. Like, if there's any part of psychology that has anything to do with science, it is the science of intelligence, of IQ research. It's like uh, intelligence is like orders of magnitude more scientifically validated than anything else in psychology. So if you're saying that IQ is pseudoscience, then you're basically saying that absolutely everything in social sciences and in psychology is like super duper pseudoscience.
Well,
Like there's
Ayn Rand said that psychology was in its infancy, and Rucka said that in our interview. Actually, he said psychology is doing its baby steps today. So
I
he,
and I agree with that, but like IQ research is pretty much the best thing we have, and it's really really solid because it's just like brain physiology. Uh, but okay, so that was one thing. Like if if they in 1860 had known about IQ distributions, then it would have been very hard to justify slavery just based on the IQ data.
yeah,
Like at the time, they said, "Oh shit, we can't like enslave people based on race because like there's too much variation within each race." So
right.
the very idea of doing that based on race alone is insane. You can't do that. And IQ research could also have prevented the Nazis from the Holocaust because the Nazis explained the fact that Jews were doing better in finance with evilness. Like
Right.
the Jews were so bad that they were just like grabbing onto all the gold they could get. So that's explained their wealth. Whereas in reality, if you just looked at the IQ scores, you would say, "Oh, okay." So on average, Jews score significantly higher on IQ tests, and that's significantly correlated with wealth accumulation. So you can explain pretty much everything of that overrepresentation on wealth by simply IQ. And if the Nazis had accepted that, they would say, "Oh, okay, that's the reason, right?" And but instead, they deliberately said, "We are throwing out IQ research as pseudoscience. We think that IQ is pseudoscience because it doesn't validate our views of Jews."
Yeah, and they said the Jews aren't being productive, they aren't being helpful to society, which is a lie. They are productive and they were helpful to society, or they wouldn't have been able to get so much wealth. I mean, wealth is a measure of how much benefit you are to society. So they had to tell all those lies and throw out the real facts in order to do what they did. So if we admit the facts and look at reality, we'll be driven away from, by logic, we'll be driven away from the Nazi position just by the facts of reality.
Yes, and once you start looking at breaking down this, Jordan Peterson, I come back to him because he actually says some smart things. He says that when you're doing an analysis of a group, you should always try to be as reductionistic as possible. In other words, you should try to break the group down to as many variables as humanly possible, and as your goal is to break it down to the individual. But once you start running into resistance, only then do you start looking at just patterns or groups, categories. And that's a very good thing. If you only look at a top category, you're not doing science. You have to start breaking it down. So looking at Jews as one category is just a fallacy. Break it down. So let's look at one variable. There are many variables here, but okay, look at just IQ. Ask the question, can we break down IQ into statistics on probabilities? And then you look at, high IQ people are much more likely to be atheists than low IQ people. Okay, let's look at atheists. What statistics do we have on that? 90% of atheists are evil communists. So when people say, the Jews were like evil communists, wait a second. Can you explain this by IQ alone? Like, if you just look at the percentage of Jews that have were above a certain IQ level, and then take the percentage of the people who are above a certain IQ level who are atheists, and look at the percentage of those who will be communists, and then compare it to any other ethnic group based on exactly the same partition on IQ and atheism and like that, then you say, then most of that overrepresentation disappears. So you can, much of what you are ascribing to Jews could actually be ascribed to high IQ, which then it leads to atheism, which then, because of lack of objectivism, leads to communism in most cases. So most atheists are unfortunately evil because they can't really become true atheists, because when you throw out religion, it becomes replaced by another religion most of the time, either Gaiaism or communism or ethno-nationalism or something like that.
Now, I might just interject a couple of words about why it is that if you don't have objectivism or some facsimile of objectivism or Aristotelianism or something, Lockeanism, if you don't have something, then you are going to default into communism or altruism. And the reason for that is because you either have reason and logic, or you have some non-logical answer. And all non-logical answers are essentially epistemologically equivalent, and altruism is there. Altruism cannot be separated from non-logical or the irrational. Altruism and the irrational are irrevocably married. So either you have a rational course or you have a course of altruism. Altruism is simply the default. I don't know if you necessarily agree with that, but I stand by that characterization to the death.
I would say that is a slight overgeneralization. So you err on the side of overgeneralization. So I would break it down to smaller categories. I would probably agree with you if you said that you replace the word altruism with a super category name that encompasses all the non-altruistic stuff.
I say that is irrationalism. The bigger category is irrationality, and inside of irrationality, ethics, altruism.
Yes. Okay, we can get into that discussion on a different time. It's a huge topic, and I love that stuff. But let's try to stick with Rucka, overreact.
Yes, let us continue with that. But I did want to just put in that thought.
I love that, yeah.
For people who wondered what was going on there.
So notice how here I used statistics, and reduction to the lowest possible groups of statistics and properties to actually to counteract the idea that you can put all blacks into the category of like a lower being. I used race research and IQ research and psychology to do that. I used IQ research to dispel the idea that Jews are evil and that they are like financed because they have like an evil morality, and that I used also now this statistical approach to find out, oh, wait a second, Jews are overrepresented among evil communists because they're overrepresented by high intelligent individuals, and intelligent beings are overrepresented in atheism, which is overrepresented in communism. So in other words, you can use statistics for good or for bad. If statistics is in the hands of objective people, it's going to be used for good. But if you have people like Rucka that says, no, statistics is bad, we will never ever look at the data, we throw that out, blank slate, we no statistics at all, then you're basically saying we're leaving the statistics over to the alt-right and to the cultural Marxists, because they look at statistics and they are crazy. They use the statistics for absolutely insane purposes.
Yeah. Now, was it you that took exception to my use of the term alt-right?
Oh yeah, I like you better be careful in that, because like Jordan Peterson is not alt-right, definitely hated by the alt-right. Same with people like Steven Crowder, hated by the alt-right, because alt-right is now today defined more or less as like if you are into this idea of a vast Jewish conspiracy thing, then you are alt-right. So alt-right today has become almost the same as like neo-Nazi. Like Richard Spencer is the one who actually coined the term.
Now, Richard Spencer's an old school Democrat, and he identifies with Talib.
Yes.
So
because he hates the Jews.
In what way? Now, I to my mind, this idea that the alt-right is racist is just a smear against the right.
No, but the thing is, it's a self-smear.
Yeah.
Because alt-right, what he's really saying, I feel like I should be on the right because I've been told that the Nazis are on the right, but it's not like the conservative right, so I need to call it something other right, some kind of alternative right.
So some racist leftist has identified himself as being further right than everybody else.
Because evil communists, atheist communists, said that after the World War that the Nazis were far right.
So, am I right that this is a smear from the left?
No, it's a smear from the right.
No, he's put himself on the right. He's from the left. He's a racist leftist. He's a collectivist leftist.
But he believes that he's alt-right.
Yeah, but he's wrong. He's just smearing the right.
Yeah, but he's smearing himself then. Like, he doesn't see it as a smear.
Well, okay, so he's an imbecile. But insofar as the left are collectivist groupthink, that's the collectivist groupthink side, and the left are the ones that are actually racist. They're the ones that are for affirmative action and cultural identity and multiculturalism. Absolutely. They are the racists. They are the group thinkers. Yes. They are the collectivists. He's a racist, he's a group thinker, he's a collectivist, and he identifies himself as being on the right. So he is a leftist who is smearing the right, in my opinion, in my humble opinion.
But smearing implies intention. Like, he's brainwashed, right? He's not doing this on purpose to smear the right. He's just brainwashed.
Okay, so he
doesn't understand that the Nazis were far-right leftists.
All right, so he's not really smearing the right. He's just adopting a mistaken identification, a historically mistaken identification.
Yes. So people don't understand this, but the term far right as a smear of first the fascists and then later the National Socialists, it was done by Stalin. And Stalin invented the idea that fascists were far right because they were pro some private property. This was in the end of the 1920s. He said, Mussolini wants private property, like firms to own their own property, and therefore he was a far right. That was what and the same with the National Socialists. They say they're not going to collectivize all the factories, and therefore they were far right. And notice, among the people or the groups that Stalin identified as far right were the Social Democrats.
Yeah,
They
not
were
yeah,
called
leftists.
they were called social fascists. That's what Stalin called the Social Democrats. No one remembers this because it's very inconvenient. This and because the conservatives are idiots and don't defend themselves, they don't talk about this.
Yeah, they know nothing about history.
And they're just being led like sheep by these evil communists. So
Now
social
go over that one more time. The conservatives are being led by evil communists.
yes, because like they if this conservatives, I think I have like I'm gonna I don't want to go into the theory, but like a little bit we can divide very roughly the left and the right into the following. People on the right believe in what's it called, the original sin. On the left, on the right, in Christianity, and unlike what most people believe, it means that they only believe that we have the capacity for innate capacity for evil. That's what original sin means. We're born with a half evil heart and half good heart. So it's like split in the middle. And if we don't have a conscience to watch ourselves, then we will become evil. That's what the right believes. So Jesus Christ, I can't believe I'm talking about this, but like Jesus talks about watching the splinter in other people's eyes rather than beam in your own. So he says, those who are without sin cast the first stone. So he says, look in a mirror, look at yourself before you look at others. And so I distinguish between a moral sense, like a moral compass, and conscience. Moral compass is something that you use to judge other people. Like when you judge, is he good? Is he bad? Then you're using your moral compass, and everyone has a moral compass. But conscience is the opposite. It's what you're turning it in on yourself. You're asking yourself, "Am I the bad guy?" It's like the group, the two comedians who are playing two German SS soldiers, and are we the baddies? Like that's funny. Okay, so the point in Christianity, they've developed this technology that they call the conscience, and it's like assume that you're evil, and if you're evil, have the capacity for evil, assume that you're if something goes wrong, maybe it's you that are at fault. So this
Right.
is like
That's
this
not.
is like
I've never thought of it that way. If you just look at it as a basic program rather than this esoteric, bizarre philosophical belief, your
yes,
basic assumption is check your premises.
yes, precisely. Check. In fact, I like this this what's it called, the splinter in someone else's eye kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
In Ayn Rand term, that's check your premises.
Yeah.
That's what she's saying. Look at yourself in the mirror.
Now we don't need to give Christianity too much credit for that, because Christianity comes from Greek paganism, and the Greeks had a very similar idea to this. They believed, first of all, that their very gods were imperfect. They believed that their own gods were running around sleeping with each other and lying and cheating and stuff. So they believed definitely that man was up to no good, man was up to mischief by his nature, and that we had to have, whatever traditions and whatever to try to sort man out. So Christianity inherited this idea from the Greeks.
No, I think that Christianity, it's actually the reason that Christianity was so compatible with the Greco-Roman traditions was precisely because it was a shared common idea. In other words, when Christians came with this splinter in your eyes and those who are without sin cast the first stone, those who were embedded in the Greco-Roman belief system, they were susceptible to this idea. So it's not like it was inherited from the Greeks. It's just that the Christianity fits very well into the Greeks.
I disagree. I think that Christianity is bastardized Platonism. I think that Plato's philosophy was widely spread at the time. We know that Jesus of Nazareth spent a lot of his time in the temples listening to the preachers talk and, susceptible to the philosophy of the day. And so after 20 or 30 years of listening to the philosophy of the time, which was a 300-year-old version of Plato, he came up with Christianity. So
I understand that, but if you look at, for instance, the Bible came before, like the Old Testament, it came before Plato,
mm-hmm.
and the book of Genesis with original sin and the snake in the garden, that's like 3,500 years old story, and so the idea of being evil, born evil, and having evil into the world, the sin in the world, original sin, is older than Plato.
Right.
But we don't have to go into that.
We don't. I just want to say I don't mean original sin with Plato. I mean world of forms and perfection, and there's one man in heaven, and we're all accidental versions of that. But anyways, let's not get off on that. Let's continue.
My point was that on the right, people believe in conscience, but on the left, generally speaking, they believe in the noble savage. We're born good. And then it's Rousseau, the idea that we're born innocent babies. Babies are innocent, and then we're corrupted by and the environment, by society.
He says man is born free, but is everywhere in chains.
That's right, because he believes that and human nature is good and only good.
Yeah,
there's nothing bad. So therefore, the leftist thinks, I'm perfect, I'm good, therefore I don't need a conscience. I don't have to look at myself and look at if I do anything wrong, because anything that comes bubbling up from my unconscious has to be just pure goodness.
Particularly if you recycle all the time and you're a vegetarian, then you must be very pure in nature, and just anything that comes out of your mind is morally pure.
That's right. So in other words, the left have a tendency to believing in that if something goes wrong, it's certainly not their fault, it's someone else's fault. Because they only have a moral compass, but they don't have a conscience. Whereas on the right, people have a very, very well, perhaps too well developed conscience, so that they tend to believe that if something goes wrong, then it's their fault. So in fact, the people on the right and on the left actually agree on this. Whenever something goes wrong, both groups thinks it's the people on the right that is at fault. They agree.
That's a good way to view the objectivists who are sort of not right about this. We got to get them online here. Like, when America does something wrong, it's America's fault. When the communists do something wrong, it's because America wasn't brave enough. It's America's fault. It's always America's fault.
Yes. And precisely, and I love conscience, and it's brilliant technology for everyone needs conscience. If you don't have a conscience, then you're a philosophical psychopath. You're not like a psychological one, but a philosophical psychopath, because you're basically believing that you are the embodiment of perfection, and nothing that comes bubbling up from your lower subconscious or unconscious can ever be anything but just pure goodness. So my point is that the left has this incredible ability of blaming everything on the right, and the right has this incredible ability of also blaming everything on the right. And it fits like a glove. Like these two are married. It's like the psychopath who finds this spouse that is very easy to control kind of thing. So it's a very abusive marriage between the left and the right, where left is the abusive spouse, and the right is the abused spouse who believes she deserves it to be beaten, right?
Yeah.
So that's the relationship between the left and the right today.
Yeah.
And An upleftivist is someone who believes that America deserves to be beaten because we're so bad, and whenever something comes from the left, it's not really evil because it's not real communism or like China and like all of these things. So we don't have to mix in upleftivism too much. I'm just pointing out that the right and the left have a symbiotic, abusive relationship.
Yeah.
You have the abuser who loves to abuse, and you have the abused who loves to be abused.
Now, if objectivism comes onto the scene, I'm saying that we come onto the scene on the right. So what do we say now? If this is the metaphor, what are we gonna say? We're gonna say leave the left, hashtag leave, like divorce, get a divorce, and stop being abused by them. I mean, what? So how does this apply to objectivism and what we should do, and how should we interpret? How should we act then?
Well, it's very difficult to say this exactly, but one thing seems to be part of the solution is that we have to be firm, like we have to be a real man, so to speak. I'm not sure, I don't want to gender this too much because of we're not supposed to do that these days. But like to be to show strength, it's like to be appeasing is not the right way to go. And we talk about this also all the time in wars. We're not supposed it was Chamberlain who was appeasing the Nazis or with Hitler, and we say that that was a bad thing, and that's correct. That was a bad thing. But all forms of appeasing the left is bad. So we should stand up to them and say that your race is bullshit. Is bullshit. If you are just 1 inch to the right of Stalin, then you're a Nazi. They say, like if you don't accept the infinite moldable, perfectly moldable man that Stalin and Mao believed in, then you're somehow a neo-Nazi. That's crazy talk, and we have to stand up against that.
Now,
so,
is Trump part of? Is he the abused? Where does Trump fit in? Because that's what everybody's going to be wondering. How do we apply this to reality? It's all good theory, but
well, actually, he is a street fighter, and that's why everyone voted for him. The right wants someone to fight for them, and so what if you want someone who is better than Trump? You should fight like Trump, but based on rational principles. Being more rational in the way you fight, and like everyone should read up. Learn the techniques of the left, learn the techniques of Trump, internalize them, how he actually wins all the time, but then improve on Trump so that we don't have to be bad Trump. Like Trump is a buffoon and he does a lot of bad things, and he's not irrational in the sense that he has a well thought out philosophy, but he's acting on more or less, let's call it instinct,
let's call it his sense of life.
Yes, sense of life. He's a street fighter, and he has he knows how to fight because he's been fighting all his life.
His sense of life, when somebody swings at him, he has a sense of life of what to do.
Yes, precisely. He fights back, and he always does it. He never apologizes.
Yeah.
Everyone keeps saying that, oh, you should apologize for this. And he knows that if you apologize, the wolves will tear you apart. So he never apologizes. Because apology is a sign of weakness, and they will smell blood. So if you give them just a tiny little finger, they will eat you raw.
Yeah.
So he never ever apologizes. He can phrase himself, but he usually, with few exceptions, he never apologizes. Okay. And we should never apologize either. And like for instance, when Rucka overreacts, what he's basically doing is that he's taking on the position of the far left. Like he's aligning himself with Mao, Stalin, Pol Pot, on their view of human nature, because he doesn't want to be a Nazi. That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah.
Because if you believe that somehow tabula rasa, or blank slate, means that you're born without a nature, that there's nothing predictable about your behavior, that all behavior is just blank. There's nothing in your biology that nudges you in various directions, that creates statistical patterns, then you are basically believing in the vision of Lenin, Soviet man that can be molded and you're perfected in the image of Stalin or Mao, right? That's basically what they believed in. They believed that man has no nature, and we have the right to beat him into submission, to shape into that communist shape that they like, the hammer and sickle.
Yeah. Can we take account of the true facts of reality without running screaming from the room, or not? Are we all going to turn into Nazis if we take account of the bell curve, for example? And as you showed, we can't. The Nazis can't use the bell curve,
because then they lose.
It destroys their position. Yeah.
The point is that facts are on the side of reason, right? And so why on earth would you run away from facts and say that, no, those facts, those are owned by the alt-right. Only the alt-right is allowed to talk about those facts.
Yeah, anybody who even discusses these facts is a racist.
That's crazy talk.
That's the far left.
Yes.
That's the far left that says that.
And notice that this is very similar to the creationists, the Christians who reject evolution based on a Marxist lie. Karl Marx said that if evolution is true, then God does not exist. That's a logical fallacy. One does not follow from the other, right? Evolution can be true, and there's still a God.
Yeah.
There might not be a God, but it doesn't follow. But then they say, oh my goodness, if there is no God, then there is no morality. This is Prager's...
So if Darwin is right, then there's no morality.
Yes, and if there's no morality, then everyone will rape babies in the streets. And so in other words, they go through this chain of logic in their mind that if evolution is correct, that this leads to baby rape and the Holocaust. And so therefore, in order to avoid baby rape and Holocaust, they say we reject evolution.
It's science. We reject science. Yeah.
So they save the babies and they save the Jews by rejecting evolution.
Now, in this way, the left and the right are not so different. They both reject science in order to save their ideology. In order to prevent, they believe that if they take account of the facts, they will be driven like wild animals down some horrific path. So they have to ignore the facts of reality, or else. Ignore reality, or else we're going to be in big trouble here, guys. That's for the left and the right.
This is one of the reasons that I think now that overall that Jordan Peterson is a force for good. People talk about that he's making religion popular again. But people don't look at the other side, that he's now making Christians look into evolutionary biology. He talks about evolution all the time. And now what's happening is that you have a room full of Christians listening to an evolutionary talk and saying, yeah, that makes sense.
Wow,
how cool is
that would be good if we could temper Christianity with
my point, exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm actually working on a book that's written for Christians about I call it like evolution for conservatives or something like that.
Nice.
So I'm explaining precisely what I did now, that you can actually believe in God, have your God if you want to, but you don't have to reject evolution. That's actually something Karl Marx wanted you to do. Karl Marx specifically don't want you to believe in evolution, because if you do, you accept a lot of conservatives' ideas, like fatherhood, the idea of the nuclear family, and all of these things. All of that comes from evolution. 99% of conservatism is just evolution. right?
Yeah.
So if you accept evolution, then you have to accept most of what conservatives believe
Yeah.
in the traditionalism and in the family unit and all of these things.
Father
All that,
figure, the mother being nurturing, the father being
yeah,
active. Yeah.
that's just evolution,
Yeah.
and that's precisely why Karl Marx doesn't want the Christians to believe in evolution, because that's their strongest card. Damn it! if if they believed in evolution, they could say, well, the father needs to be in the house because 2 million years ago, the father role evolved in humans. This is one of the few things that separates from us from the apes.
Right.
We have fathers; they don't. They have sperm donors. We have fathers.
And the nuclear family being a type of miniature society that can defend itself and so on. That's why we're so
Yes,
successful.
that evolved 2 million years ago. We know exactly when that happened. And it evolved before we became like real humans. We were like, then back then we were actually half humans. Like the Democrats in the South, they would probably be morally correct into enslaving them and saying that we're not real humans, those who lived 2 million years ago, because they were half monkeys. Then they would actually be correct about that, because they were actually not intelligent and humans. But they invented monogamy and the nuclear family 2 million years ago. And the reason we know that is because we see that there's a difference between men and women was dramatically reduced then. Men become physically more like women 2 million years ago. And this is a strong sign that competition between men was reduced 2 million years ago. And why would competition between men be reduced? Well, what does chimps fight? Chimp males. What do they fight about? Women, right? To become the harem king, to the feudal king. So what happens is that the feudal king was overthrown and he was replaced by in the nuclear family.
Yeah. And to the extent that we maintain nuclear families today, we have stable societies. But
Yes.
when you do away with the nuclear family, you get 30 or 40% of the males in society have no access to females, and the wealthy males have all the females in harems of some kind or another.
Yeah.
And you end up with very scary instability. When you have 20% of males running around horny and unemployed, that's a very scary society.
Well, then you basically get a lot of the Muslim world, because men aren't allowed to touch women, and they're living secluded. Women are sort of off limits,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of men aren't simply not allowed to get a woman, because you have harems. You can have more than one wife, right? And
Mm-hmm.
as a consequence, you have lots of horny, angry men who at the same time believe that if they kill themselves, they will come to heaven and have 70 virgins. That's an explosive combination.
Yeah,
Pun intended.
the upper classes in Islam are just it's nice explosive. Okay, I got it. That's the upper class in Islam, just like spreading a belief to get rid of the rabble.
Yes. And so they achieve two things. They have cheap labor as suicide bombers, and they're getting rid of the rabble at the same time, getting them doing something useful, which is fighting the enemy. So it's like,
Kamikaze style, yeah.
yeah. So it's a win-win situation for those at the top. They're never suicide bombers. They leave that to the incels, right?
Yeah. Well, there we go. That's why we should preserve the nuclear family. So the conservatives are right
Precisely.
on that.
So, and here's the point: Karl Marx, he was gloating when Charles Darwin published his book, and he was praising it, and he wanted to write an introduction to it in his like a praise. He wanted to what's it called when you devote a book to his Das Kapital. He wanted to devote his book to Charles Darwin, but he just refused. He didn't want to do that. He was a classical liberal and wanted nothing to do with Karl Marx. And the reason he liked evolution so much was that he believed it undermined God, and therefore he believed it undermined Christianity, and he loved that because Christianity he viewed as the gatekeepers of capitalism. which in many senses he was right about at the time. But then he started reading Darwin, and he says, "Oh, wait a second. I don't want to have anything to do with this guy because this means conservatism." So later, just a few years later, he says, "Well, Darwin was right about that thing that God doesn't exist kind of thing, but he doesn't apply to man at all. Like we're social Darwinism bad, all of that stuff. Like he says, which Darwin should never ever be applied to humans because if it did, it would undermine his dream of communism, because communism is completely not in alignment with human nature at all."
They had the Lamarckian idea of being able to change man and so on. Yeah, they spread that false biology too, a false version of evolution.
Yes, Lysenkoism.
Lysenko's biology. Yeah.
Yes, right. So my point here is what we're seeing now is actually one of these flips. What's it called? Copernican inversions, where creationists are shifting places. They're flipping views, so that you have creationism moving from the right, Christian right, over to the postmodern left, and you have science and evolution moving from the rational left or the scientific left over to the Christian right or the conservative right. This is going on right now, where they're switching positions. Now you have the left saying we are all created equal. That's creationism. And when we say created equal, like in Jeffersonian way, we mean it in equal under the law, but they mean it biologically, right?
Yeah.
We're created equal biologically,
yeah.
which is insane. So they now believe in fairy tales, biological fairy tales, and they reject science, the evolution, science of evolution. They don't believe that science applies to the above the neck. And so when Rucka overreacts, he's basically buying into the idea that evolution does not apply to this part of the body.
Right, we have free will.
From up here, no evolution. This is where evolution stops and free will begins, which is like the mind-body dichotomy, which is insane. This has nothing to do with Ayn Rand. She rejected the mind-body dichotomy, and she rejected the idea that free will could be something floating, a zombie or a ghost in the machine that's not affected by biology.
Right.
So evolution doesn't stop here; it goes all the way up here, and including free will. And it would be insane. How can free will evolve by natural selection if it's not affected by and molded by natural selection?
Right. If it's not somewhere, it has to be somewhere and have some nature.
Precisely. If free will evolve, and I hope people believe, objectivists believe that free will somehow evolve, then natural selection had to mold free will so that it's a survival organ.
Right.
So it means that you can shape free will so that it has statistical tendencies.
Yeah, and it's a limited survival organ. It turns off and on, and we're not always using it. Sometimes we go to sleep and daydream and zone out.
Yes, because most of our existence in our lineage, we didn't have free will or didn't need that kind of conceptual free will. We can live as non-conscious beings, as we've done for billions of years, right? So we can live on non-conscious or unconscious processes quite well.
And a lot of people in society do, and we should probably expect that will continue. Society will continue to have a large number of people who just accept the stuff around them and don't ever turn on their thinking cap like we are trying to do right now in this chat.
Precisely. And the thing is, maybe we can envision a future if we start fixing our genes. I'm not going to call it eugenics, but like a steered evolution. Maybe sometimes in the distant future we can change our own nature so that we become more thinking machines, like that we're less unconscious and more conscious, more thinking. Like we were molding our minds to become better at dealing with things in a rational way. That's possible.
Well, I like Richard Dawkins or Daniel Dennett's idea of mind machines. I think we can do a lot of work just tweaking our software, and I think objectivism is that. I think objectivism is really, really good software, and
Precisely.
and so I think with objectivism we can, like when I'm not focusing, I've already set up my life in such a way that the things that I'm not focusing on are not bad. So it's not like when I lose focus and decide that, oh, I'm tired, I'm going to unfocus, all of a sudden I'm out there with pimps and drug dealers on the street or something. You know, when I unfocus, I tend to watch gardening movies or something like that, or some video about painting or something. You know, that's how I unfocus. So unfocusing and not using your will like rigidly doesn't mean that you've suddenly dropped the context of your free will. You have set up that condition that you're now going to unfocus in. So when you're unfocused, you're still in a focused state of whatever you have set up as your conditions. So I think we can get pretty far away from an unfocused and random existence with just the software of objectivism, but not that that's a big argument.
I'm very glad you said that, because now if people listen into this conversation like Rucka overreacts, they might get the idea that we're only talking about biology and genes. But the point you're making is very good. It's that whatever happened 50 to 100,000 years ago when we evolved our conceptual mode of being, that is such a powerful organ or tool, and we haven't just we're not anywhere near in figuring out how to utilize that in the most efficient way. So objectivism is just even the beginning of that. So Ayn Rand started fleshing out these ideas, but she's only one human being. I mean, what happens if you have 10 Ayn Rands who can build on top of each other to really focus in on that software? Even what Ayn Rand left us is just an awesome toolkit. And if the entire world adopted her toolkit, that alone would just transform the world. And if you don't believe that, it's just look at the difference between North Korea and South Korea to see what the software alone can do.
Now let's we should probably wrap up in a few minutes here, but let's discuss then, where should objectivism just stay separate at this point in history? Like Ayn Rand said, don't worry about the Republicans and Democrats, they're both rotten as hell. You've got to win the battle of ideas first. But in my view, the Republicans have gone away somewhere. There were 16 Republicans on the stage with Trump, and Trump won. So the Republicans are gone. So it's no longer the Republicans versus the Democrats, in my humble opinion. So where should objectivism go? Should objectivism try to set itself up on this stage and say, our 5 core beliefs are, lower taxation, more freedom of speech, blah, 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 set up 5 things for politics that objectivists would believe and say that's our platform. Should we go to the left with it, or should we go to the right with it and try to start having an effect today? Or is it too early? What do you say?
I think that most people don't realize that if you draw away most of what Trump is saying with his mouth, he's really a centrist, like politically. He's centrist. Because if you disregard who is doing it, Trump is like very good on a lot of topics when it comes to like gay rights and all of these things.
Now, what do you mean centrist? Between the Republicans and the Democrats? I mean,
centrist.
It used to be the Republicans wanted to lower taxes a little, and the Democrats wanted to raise taxes a little, but they pretty much agreed on it. And the Republicans didn't want so much funding for the public schools. The Democrats wanted to raise the funding, But now Trump wants to do away with government involvement in the public school. He wants to take federal funding out of the school system, for example.
But at the same time, he is, even though he's pushing abortion a little bit, which is leaning right, he's at the same time very open when it comes to gays, which leans left, like all of these things. So if you look at the things, some things, that's typically left-wing, like on social issues. And on other issues, that's more like right-wing, like on abortion.
I think he's just doing the abortion for the votes.
That might be true, but we don't care what is in his mind. We look at behavior, and so we're not mind reading him. And in his behavior, he's acting in a semi-centrist way. And the point is this: objectivists should sort of try to inject themselves around the center. And when I mean center, meaning if you look at the libertarians, they can be thought of as a form of centrist viewpoint, apart from being crazy in some respect. Like, so if you're saying that leave this weed stuff to the states, as you pointed out, we already won that thing. We don't have to argue for it, but we can still ride the wave that this is now a centrist position with legalization of marijuana like that. And if we're placing ourselves in the center so that we're clearly picking up the right, but at the same time we're not completely rejecting the same part of the left, then we're doing things. So I think Dave Rubin has it right. Don't talk about the people on the left as liberals. Talk about them as progressives, because the progressives are insane. Call them leftists. Do not call them liberal. Call yourself a liberal, a classical liberal. Because then you are, in name, placing yourself on what's perceived as the left, but you're at the same time leading a politics that is just very conservative liberalism, like classical liberalism.
Yeah.
So calling ourselves classical liberals places us in a very nice category.
Okay, so that's where we should place ourselves. We come onto the scene and they say, "Who are you?" And we say, "We're classical liberals. We're objectivists." Can we say we're objectivists? We're objectivists.
Yeah, you can do that, but
and we're in the classical liberal tradition or something like that, right? Now, so we announce ourselves now. So is it time to do that then? Or should we stay quiet like Rucka says, both the left and the right are terrible. We need to win the ideas first.
I hate to quote Jordan Peterson again, but he says some nice things from time to time. He said, "Put your house in perfect order before you criticize the world." I think that we still have some house cleaning to do on the objectivist side. I think that I agree with you that we should. Part of that is starting thinking about riding the bus in the right direction, but we should start with ourselves, cleaning up ourselves before we announce to the world that we have something to offer. So we still have some work to do.
What form does that take? Tell me what form that takes, because I don't know what you mean.
Well, like now, if you want to bring on board people like conservatives, you can talk to them. That's okay. But if they ask you, like, okay, you're an objectivist, and they find people of leftivists, they say, "Oh, who are these crazy people?" And then you say, "Well, there are people who disagree with us who also call themselves objectivists." And there are a lot of crazy people that we have to deal with. So what I'm thinking is that while we're sort of warming up people, attracting people to the correct objectivism, we need to clean up our own house, meaning that we have to even like I don't think we should disparage people. Like the term of leftist shouldn't be used always just in a derogatory sense. Like we're not trying to push away all of that group of objectives. Like creating a split is a bad idea. I think we should have a conversation with that group and try to make them understand that they are doing something wrong. In this video, for instance, I try to explain that when Rucka overreacts, he is doing it based on a misunderstanding of Ayn Rand. He doesn't understand tabula rasa. He doesn't understand free will, all of these things. Now, if he actually is an honest intellectual, I hope he is, then he will say, I didn't get that right. I need to think more closely about this. And we need to have a closer conversation about this. And accepting that free will is molded by genes and by surroundings doesn't mean that you have to put people in gas chambers.
Doesn't mean you don't have free will just because it has a nature.
Yes, it doesn't mean that we have to accept biological determinism. You have to accept biological naturalism, but not biological determinism. Right. Naturalism means that everything has a nature, including free will. Free will is not excluded from reality. It's not a supernatural thing that resides up in a Platonic mind-body heaven. You
Very
see?
good.
So I think that we can have this conversation at the same time as we start talking to other people.
All right. So we need to take objectivism forward, but we need to straighten out our ideas
Yes.
sort of before and as we do that.
Yes.
And the straightening out of the ideas consists of getting the leftists on board.
Yes. Correct.
So I like everything you said all around. Very good.
Now, as a start, everyone should start watching Scott Adams.
Scott Adams.
Scott Adams, the Dilbert guy.
Oh, okay.
He would be described as a pragmatist, and he's definitely not an objectivist. He believes himself rational, but he believes that facts don't matter in politics, only emotions. And even though he's wrong philosophically, he's such a smart guy, and says so many smart things. And he's talking about persuasion, and he's explaining how Trump is the embodiment of the perfect persuader. Like he's using hypnotics, and just because he's philosophic. This is not for the amateur objectivists, but for the smart and good. Advanced objectivists who's safe in their own philosophy. Like this is not for the everyday person, the randroid.
Because they're going to go on there and they're going to say he's not an objectivist.
That's right. And so I make the warning. He's not an objectivist. He's bad thinker in many ways. He's a pragmatist. All of these things you can tear him down. Just like with Jordan Peterson, he can be criticized a lot. Same with Sam Harris. A lot of these guys can be easily criticized, but you should pay attention to them. Very important. Pay attention. For instance, the right question to ask is not is Jordan Peterson a gateway drug to the alt-right? That's insane. The correct question to ask: why is he able to fill up giant stadiums with 3,000 people in cities across the world? Why aren't objectivists doing that? So the smart Christians are doing this. Smart Christians are saying, we have empty churches. This guy goes talking about the Bible, and he fills up, gets people to, he gets people to pay $50 to listen to him talk about the Bible. 3,000 people. They say, something's going on. He's on the radar because of that. So a lot of Christians are listening to an evolutionary psychologist and want to understand what is going on. We should also do the same, because not only because he's a good thinker, he has some important points, but he has bad thinking also. But he's one who can be converted to objectivism. He's not out of the realm here. Like, we don't have to talk him down. He has been at Ocon, right?
I doubt he can be converted, because I think at this point he thinks his message is so big and so important. I think it's slightly gone to his head, and I think he's just going to go ahead with his.
And he might be too old.
Yeah, he's too old. He's too old. But there's something in common with objectivism in that he's willing to consider these big ideas and think about them, and a lot of people can't connect two thoughts together. So we have something in common with somebody who can at least think.
And we should praise Jordan Peterson whenever he does something right. In fact, we should praise everyone. Whenever someone says something right, it doesn't matter whether they are Muslims, or they're on the left, or progressives, or if they're Jordan Peterson or whoever. If someone says something right, praise them, because that is you're building what's it called, report. That's like from hypnotic literature. You're walking along with them and agreeing with them, and that makes them more likely that they will listen to you when you're disagreeing with them. First agree, and then disagree later, right? So this is a very good idea. Always tell someone when you agree with them, especially if you disagree with them heavily on other things. If you agree with someone, just say it. And this is from Scott Adams. Like, he's so good at this. He's using persuasion techniques. So, for instance, we've been using the word Nazi here a lot. He says, listen to Donald Trump. When he talks about racism or this, he never uses the term racist. He doesn't say, I am not a racist. Because in persuasion, the brain doesn't hear the not part. They hear only racist, the word racist.
Right.
So if I say to you, don't think about an elephant, you will think about an elephant. Even if I said you shouldn't think about it. So he's saying, if you're saying, I'm not a racist, what will you think about? Racist, right? So notice how there are certain words he never uses, and he's using these techniques, and he's doing it so brilliantly. And if people understood that he's not just a buffoon, he's actually a brilliant buffoon who's using incredibly advanced 4D chess hypnotic techniques to persuade people, and he's perhaps the most brilliant persuader that has been in the public sphere perhaps ever, then you get a new appreciation of him. Like, this guy knows what he's doing. There's a reason why he became a president, and there's a reason why he will be reelected. He's brilliant at what he's done. He's a buffoon. He has a lot of bad ideas, but he's brilliant.
You know, everybody kept saying, "Oh, now he's done. He said this or that. Now he's done." But you're only done if you accept the left's narrative that stuff finishes you in.
Let me give you an example of that. When was it? I think it was Ilhan Omar or something like that who said something bad, and now they were saying so bad things that Nancy Pelosi got on the scene, starting bad mouthing Ilhan Omar and AOC, the squad. And everyone on the right, which is bringing out the popcorn, like, yeah, give it to me, yeah, bitch fight, like that. And Trump says, oh my goodness, this is a catastrophe. It's too early. They're cleaning up their house. They're going to have this bitch fight now, 1 year ahead of the election. So they're going to push out the crazy people, leaving only the moderates. That's awful.
Yeah, he wants there to be turmoil during the election.
So what is it? He goes on Twitter and says that Ilhan Omar and these squad people should go back to their countries of origin and fix them up, and then come back again and teach us, right? Everyone just heard "go back," which is like this racist trope, right?
Yeah.
So, and he says, and I'm sure that Nancy Pelosi will pay their tickets.
Right.
And he did that knowing full well that Nancy Pelosi was going to drink herself to bed that night, because she had to go on Twitter and say, no, I support AOC.
Right. He attacks them, he points out the divide, and then they look over at Trump and they go, we're not actually that divided, Trump. Don't worry about it. We're not divided.
And the worst part is that Nancy Pelosi understood what he was doing, and she knew that he wanted her to do this, and she had no choice.
She had to do what he's... yeah, he's brilliant that way. And so now... they're going to move forward with their troubles without figuring out how to deal with these troubles. That's what's going to happen.
I'm losing my...
Oh, are we losing connection here? We might be losing connection. Is that what's happening? Well, ladies and gentlemen, we'll draw a line there. That's all right. We were trying to wind it down earlier, but we'll go 3 hours if we need to. I thought we were just running out of steam earlier, so. But it looks like we've run out of bandwidth or connection speed or something like that. Oops. I don't know what. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me.